Welcome to the Leadership Podcast, where our disagreements inform your decisions. I'm Dion Dixon, and tonight I'm joined by Will Atkins and Brett Miller. Thea was supposed to join us tonight. Unfortunately, she is experiencing the very real issues of Los Angeles traffic tonight and was unable to make it. So Thea, hopefully you make it home safe tonight. And if you have the opportunity this week, hopefully you'll be able to do a not an episode rejoinder to what we discussed tonight. Our topic for tonight is going to be the presidential pardon power. And we will probably talk about what is happening recently in the news now as we're recording, which is some of President Biden's pardons and commutations that have come out recently in the news. And then, of course, that'll probably lead us to discussions about previous presidents' pardons and maybe future president-elect pardons that we think will come up. Before we get started, just in case the camera does end up showing my shirt, which has a DARPA logo on it, I want to make sure to put in this disclaimer that nothing that I say should be construed to be the official position of the United States government, the Department of Defense, or the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And with that, let's see. How about we start with the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, which says, "He shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment." So that's what we're talking about now, the fact that the United States Constitution gives the president the power to pardon for crimes against the United States. And there we go. So Will, Brett, either of you want to take it away?
I can hold my fire, because we're gonna talk about Biden pardoning his son, right? And in my opinion, he only did that because of the actions of former President Trump, soon to be President Trump again. I don't think he does that if Trump was not reelected.
I have so I agree with you and I disagree. Well, yeah, in different order. I do somewhat agree with you and I do somewhat disagree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you that I think he would not have done that if Kamala Harris had been elected, but I also think that probably Harris would have pardoned Hunter Biden instead.
Yeah.
And I disagree with you on the reasoning for it. I think first and foremost, whatever you might think or say about Joe Biden, my impression of the man is that he does care very deeply for his children and his family. As a father myself, I imagine that if I had the power to do the same, which is perfectly legal, right? The highest law of the land says that he has the power to do it and places virtually no constraints on it, right? All it says is that basically the only constraint is that he can only pardon crimes against the United States. So you're still subject to criminal prosecution in the individual states. And that the pardon power cannot be used in impeachments. But other than that, it is perfectly legal for him to pardon whomever he wants for whatever he wants. And again, as a father, if it were my son, I would probably do the same. Now, that being said, I think the reason that he did it is because he's 83 years old and he does not want to live the rest of his life with his son behind bars. He wants to enjoy that time with his son, however much time he still has left. And also, I think that based on how things went down when Joe Biden was the Democrat nominee for the election, and then it became Kamala Harris, I think from the outside looking in that there may be a little bit of bad blood right now between Joe Biden and the rest of the party. And I get the impression from the outside looking in that maybe he's given a little bit of the middle finger to the party and saying, you know what, I'm going to do what's good for Joe Biden right now because you guys did me dirty. So that's where I disagree with you a little bit, but we could talk about that.
Brett, what do you think?
It's one of those that, like with Dion said, like having children, I understand the position from being a father, right? However, it's one of those that, I mean, he pled guilty to the 9 counts of the indictment, right? And it's one of those that, yes, I understand it, but at the same time, like if someone's guilty of it, like there's a price to be paid. Yes, Joe Biden is older. He doesn't want to see his son behind bars. But I mean, we're talking about, you know, tax evasion and purchasing a gun when you're not supposed to. I don't know what the penalty would have been. I don't know what the sentencing would have been. I can't imagine it would have been anything like a life sentence or things like that. I don't know. I didn't look at that. Do either of you guys know what the potential sentence would have been?
No, I wish I had. I believe that there is minimum sentencing guidelines, at least for the gun crime, because it had to do with drugs. And I want to say going back to like the late 80s, early 90s, when they were passing a lot of those war on drugs reforms and legislation, that I think a lot of those came with like minimum sentencing standards.
Yeah. And so it's one of those, like I said, I can see both sides of it. My take on it would be that I think it was solely for personal gain that he used the pardoning power in this. You know, and that's his prerogative to do so, right? Do I agree with it? No, I don't think.
So what's the personal gain that you think he was using it for? Because I've heard this, but I want to make sure that our listeners and viewers understand what the allegation there is.
Well, it's kind of what you said, Dion. It was to have access to his son, to not see his son behind bars, right? I know there's things that are out there that saying that, oh, this pardon wasn't really for Hunter. The pardon was really for Joe. You know, yes, there's there, but it's just allegations. You know, there's no evidence that by, you know, pardoning Hunter that it keeps him from testifying against his father in court. You know, I know those are out there, but, you know, I don't know as they're fully founded rumors, right? So from my perspective, I think he just did it from the position of a father, not wanting his son to go to jail. But I don't, like I said, I don't think it was the right thing to do, you know, especially after the man repeatedly said that he would not pardon his son, that he would abide by the justice system, you know, and to me, that means that whatever the sentence is, then it's carried out, that it's supposed to be. Now, if sentencing had been done and he was able to step in and maybe reduce the sentence, I could see that being, you know, a merciful act. But to me, it's I don't know. We were talking about this slightly before we started the episode, but there's a lot of, I'd call it misuse of the presidential power of pardon that we've seen in current and recent times, that it's been mostly political gain or personal gain. Whereas if you look at the history of it, the intention of the pardon was mostly for healing of sorts, right? National healing, to where you're trying to bring a nation back together after the transition of power, or things that happen. I mean, you look back to, you know, George Washington, for example. You know, it's the first presidential pardon issues, you know, participants in the Whiskey Rebellion. And I mean, that's the whole point, is that you're trying to establish and restore peace after civil unrest. You know, Jefferson, he did kind of the same thing, you know, convicted, or the pardon people that were convicted under the Alien and Sedition Acts, which he viewed as unconstitutional, but it was to do things that were to bring the country back together. Civil War, you saw the same thing, where Lincoln went through and pardoned a lot of the Confederate soldiers because, again, we're trying to heal a nation, bring people back together. So there was a lot more of that. But when we start getting into the 20th century, now we start seeing things change, right? Probably the biggest one was Ford when he pardoned Nixon. That's one I don't know if I necessarily agree with. Like, you know, I wasn't really alive at that time, so I can't say much about it, but just reading on history. But Even kind of, Jimmy Carter, I think his was probably more geared when he was doing the blanket pardon for Vietnam draft dodgers, because it was a very contentious war. But, again, it's national reconciliation. I think that was a better use of it. But then when we get to the modern use, when we look at, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and now Joe Biden, the way that it's been used, it's been very much for a personal and political game. It's not been for the benefit of the nation. And that's kind of where I see this one, is that it was meant for more personal gain than it was for the benefit of a nation trying to have a peaceful transfer of power, that we're moving into a new era, looking at what the people want. So anyway, that's my kind of take on it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you on most of that. I mean, obviously it was for personal gain of some sort, whether that's just to spend time with his son or to try to head something else off at the pass. So I tend to be one of those people, like, I don't want to give Joe Biden a pass and then hammer Trump for whatever. I try to stay as equal as possible. In this particular case, what I excuse me, this entire pardon issue to me is an example excuse me, of the larger issue of Trump sorry, the erosion of institutions, the way that Trump used his pardon power eroded that particular power, such that now, Biden's going to do something similar, that sort of thing.
So, Brett, what I thought you were going to bring up when you talked about for personal reasons or personal gain was there is a theory going on out there that, going back to like the Hunter Biden laptop and the potential peddling in influence and corruption and things that supposedly happened within the Biden family. And the reason that the pardon specifically goes all the way back to January 1st of 2014 is that, and it says for those offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1st, 2014 through December 1st, 2024. A lot of people are thinking, that's right before he joined the board at Burisma. So that's very interesting, that time span. So I've seen these sort of theories that, he's trying to tie up loose ends and make sure that as Trump comes into power, he doesn't have any strings to pull on that could potentially lead to any kind of investigation or criminal accusations against Joe Biden himself.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, Dion. Like, I know those are there, but they're not necessarily fully founded ideas. Now, I do think it is rather suspect when you start looking at something like that. Like, if you really just wanted to pardon your son for the crimes that he was up against, then do that. But you give this blanket pardon of 11 years. 11 is a very specific time frame, right? It's not like 5 years. It's not 10 years.
To be fair, it's actually 10 years and 11 months. But yeah. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but still, like, again, it's a very specific time frame to cover for that. And so that just makes you wonder, especially when you put in the clause of crimes that he may have committed or been part of, like, come on, right? Like, if you want to keep it above board, then you pardon him for what he's actually on the docket for, right? You're not saying like, oh, well, hey, anybody and everybody, and I know it hasn't come around and I haven't seen any further news on it, but then there's the preemptive pardon talk that's been going around. It's like, oh, well, maybe we should just do blanket pardons for everybody that was part of the administration, just in case Trump wants to come after him. Again, that's the kind of talk that I don't think is beneficial, right? That's not healing a nation. That is not trying to move forward in the right direction. Yeah, I don't agree with all of Trump's movements, but I don't think he's going to be focused on trying to go back and just harm everybody that had it out for him at one point or another. I think he's going to be more focused on the future and following. What's that?
I said, do you know Trump? Like, that's his entire personality. His entire campaign is based on hurting people who he thinks like crossed him or that he disagrees with. I don't think preemptive pardons for the entire administration is the right thing to do. I'm with you on that, but I don't blame them for at least considering it, knowing. I don't know Trump personally, but the way that he has conducted himself, it would not surprise me in the least if he's very focused on, getting back at all of these people.
So let me ask this, I guess. Do we feel like Trump and his Department of Justice would find sufficient evidence or come up with sufficient evidence to convict people who weren't actually guilty of those crimes? Like, do we think that they're going to make stuff up and be corrupt going after opponents? Or
so because you would hope that the justice system is strong enough that the Justice Department is above board enough. 100%. That would probably prevent things from getting too far. But yes, he would make those people's lives miserable, even if at the end there is not enough evidence to convict. Or
I guess what I'm getting at is that, like, so like, if for whatever reason Trump was like, I'm going after Dion Dixon tomorrow, there's a large part of me that's like, okay, bring it, because you've got nothing to find, right? And the Justice Department that he heads would have to be so completely to its core corrupt to come up with anything to convict me on. You know what I mean? That I'd just be like, okay. And so the reason that I bring that up is because I kind of want to get to a point where we kind of have the discussion of, do we believe that there may be something that is questionably criminal, or at least bad enough that would warrant an investigation on some of these people, that Joe Biden thinks that they should receive a preemptive pardon?
So I just want to make sure too. I mean, you guys saw in the news, I think it was just today, maybe yesterday, the fact that the FBI guy made up the entire Burisma thing. Did you guys see those articles?
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Like he testified to lying about it.
Yeah.
Which guy was that? Ray or Bill Barr or?
No, I had it just here. Just let me look it up real quick.
Lower level guy.
Smirnov.
So
yeah, Alexander Smirnov.
And that's part of, so like when we're talking about whatever it was, 11 years, right? And the fact that it lines up with Burisma and all that. Especially if this guy is testifying that he made the entire thing up, but then Biden is still pardoning his son for it, potentially, tells me that he does not think the next Justice Department will treat his son fairly. Mm-hmm. And that's so, when we're talking about, I would hope that the Justice Department would be above board, but it doesn't surprise me that they're talking about it. And to your point, Dion, about, if Trump wanted to come after you, have at it because you don't have anything to hide, that sort of thing. When Trump was convicted of the hush money being an FEC violation, campaign finance law violation, the argument on the right was, it's such a stretch. They're looking for things to convict him for. Who cares? And I think if that's the thought process that the right and Trump has when he comes into office, he's going to do a similar thing to whoever he can find on the left and from the Biden administration. So if you think that the hush money thing was a stretch and he never should have been convicted for that, then in my mind, you should also think that same way for whatever it is that Trump's going to find on somebody in the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that I agree that, I mean, you shouldn't pay off your porn star with hush money before, while you're running for president. I don't agree with any of that. I'm just saying, like, if that was a stretch, then, because I do think we're going to see, I mean, you can tell I don't have a whole lot of faith in Donald Trump's morals. But I do think you're going to find some frivolous lawsuits against Biden administration people.
Okay. Brett, what do you think?
Well, I mean, we've kind of veered into a whole nother topic here, right? We're no longer on presidential pardon. Now we're talking about the justice system and how well it is and how corrupt it's not.
But
right?
that's where the pardon comes from. It's,
Yeah. And I mean, that's maybe where, to try to bring it back on topic with the pardon, maybe that's something that should be looked in is that a power that the president should have unchecked? Right.
It's one of the few, if not the only one, that's completely unchecked in the Constitution.
There's a few others, but that's probably the one that sticks out the most. I mean, that and, you've got nuclear and the right to declare war, for 30 days, 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is, 60 days, I think.
Those aren't really actually enumerated in the Constitution. So we could argue that he shouldn't have that power. But yeah. So I take your point, Brett. I take your point that we are maybe a little bit astray of our original topic about the pardons, but I think it makes sense to kind of talk about how much faith we have in our justice system itself, because if you have if we have a well-functioning and well-regulated and well-scrutinized justice system that is doing the absolute best for actual justice for the people, then the power of the pardon probably does not need to be changed or reined in or any of that, right? Because the justice system should arguably be doing a very good job. But if we conclude that the justice system is maybe corrupt or has been weaponized for political uses, then that maybe tells us something about, there's a lot of talk about whether there should be more checks and balances against the presidential pardon. And if we decide that the Justice Department is not faithfully executing its job for the American people, then additional checks and balances against that constitutional power that the president has would actually further exacerbate the problem of justice for American citizens potentially.
I mean, I could see a simple, the president can't pardon someone if he gets some sort of benefit from it, and in Joe Biden's case, it's his son. There's some kind of benefit from it. He wouldn't be able to do that. But then in the same token, that means that Trump can't pardon people from, all of the people that he pardoned during his administration.
Yeah, Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, all those guys, like the same thing. Like, I think if there is a personal gain for the president that just muddies the water, and whether it's legal or not, I would say just stay away from it. But
now here is something that I wanted to bring up with Thea on the line, and unfortunately, like I said, she's not going to be able to make it, but it would be nice to have a lawyer weigh in on this. I saw this written someplace, and I really had to scratch my head on it. There are cases where, like, Congress during congressional testimonies and judges have ordered people to testify. Because it was required for whatever. And somebody brought up online that with a pardon of any and all crimes that Hunter Biden may have committed or had committed during that time frame, that the Fifth Amendment no longer applies, because he cannot be convicted of those crimes. So it's not self-incrimination to testify, even if he was fully involved in something. So somebody online was like, Joe Biden may have, if the idea was to protect himself from further investigation on certain things, he may have shot himself in the foot by pardoning his son, because now his son can be ordered to testify because there is no self-incrimination anymore because he's been pardoned. I don't know if that's true or not. Logically, it seems to pass the sniff test.
Except that the sentence for contempt of court or failure to appear is nowhere near the sentence for anything else, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So, as payment back, hey, Dad, thanks for getting me out of jail. I will not testify, even though it doesn't self-incriminate.
Yeah. Well, so we should probably talk about whether we think that the pardon power of the president should be changed or reined in at all. So,
well, I think you already kind of talked about it, Dion, to where it's like, if the justice system is acting as it's supposed to, then I don't think there's a need to, right? If people are acting on the up and up and everything is above board, then yeah, it is genuinely an act of mercy that the president has through the pardon power, right? But if you have a justice system that is corrupt, it brings us back to that topic. That's a bigger issue, right? We're talking about, we've got an FBI informant that said he's lying. And now we've also got information that there was 26 informants in DC on January 6th. It's things like this, where it's like things are not lining up like they're supposed to. So that's where it makes you wonder, do we need to limit the power of pardon because of that? Or do we need to clean house in other areas?
And I would, like we'd already said, I mean, putting some kind of limit in terms of, if there's any conflict of interest, essentially, it's just a conflict of interest restriction. But in general, I have always kind of wondered why that power, why is that one of the few that there are no checks and balances on? What is it about the presidential pardon that we felt was, necessary when we wrote the Constitution, that we were like, there will be no checks on this power? I don't understand what the reasoning behind that would have been.
Yeah, I'm not sure in terms of the checks. I mean, I know it has its roots in English law, because the king would exercise that similar power. And so it's probably a carryover. But I mean, to your point, Will, why there's no checks and balances, that part seems strange.
I mean, because unless it's being used in a partisan manner, I would think that any kind of, presidential pardon plus whatever, a simple majority of Congress, unless the pardon's being used for a political reason, I don't feel like, having a congressional check on that would alter the power that much.
I kind of get the impression, and I did look for a little bit of this when I was doing my research this week, and I didn't find anything satisfying enough to even put in my notes as to why the founding fathers might have put this pardon power into the Constitution, especially with no checks on it. My gut feel, though, is that it seems like there are a couple of places in the Constitution where the founding fathers recognized that it only makes sense for a single individual to wield a certain power, for instance, being the commander in chief, right? They did not think that it would be wise or efficient for a war to be waged by committee, right? They kind of understood you need a leader, a single person who can make decisions. And I wonder if, as Brett was saying, maybe as like a carryover from English law, where they also kind of felt the same thing. If there had been a miscarriage of justice and a person needed reprieve from a justice system that failed him, it's far less likely that that mercy would come from a committee as opposed to coming from a single person.
I could see that. I think I pushed back a little bit on the singular commander in chief thing, because he's the commander in chief, sure, but he can't go to war without Congress. He can't fund the war without Congress. There's not a lot that the president can do simply by themselves, without some sort of buy-in or check or something. So, and I was going to ask you, Dion, as the token libertarian, do you think that the president should not have this power at all? Is that where would a libertarian fall on whether this power should even exist?
I think most libertarians sort of defer to the Constitution as being a fairly wisely written document by men who had come by their wisdom through war and bloodshed and through difficult times. And but I can't imagine that a probably not insignificant number of libertarians would say that's an awful lot of power for one person to wield. And also, like, there really are like no limits. Like the president could spend 4 years just pardoning whomever he wants for whatever they've done, right? Which would completely undo the justice system as we know it. So I
Well,
can
and something to
definitely
remember
see.
there, Dion, is something you pointed out too, is that it is only for federal offenses, right? It's not for state crimes. It's
Right.
not for civil cases. So there is a limit that's there. It has to be a federal offense. So it's somewhat, but yeah, I agree that it's still kind of a broad thing.
Yeah. So me personally, I do tend to defer to what's written in the Constitution again, because I do think that those men, with all of their flaws, were pretty wise about governance. You know, they may have been wrong about many other things, but they seem to have constructed a form of government that, even with its flaws, has thus far withstood the test of time and the slow progress of technology and the explosion of our population and the expansion across the continent and all of the everything that comes with that, right? Um, our system of government definitely has its flaws, but we still seem to be doing it, and largely with the precepts that they put in place almost 250 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'll buy that. It's written that way in the Constitution, so I am perfectly fine. Like, okay, they have an unchecked power. I just don't get it, and I think no one's. I don't want to keep bashing Trump, but while it was used, once or twice in perhaps controversial ways previously, personally, it seems like the first Trump administration used it a lot in a lot of personally conflicting ways that has kind of debased, has kind of just taken that whole thing down. A lot has been written about, the norms and, the unwritten rules of Washington and how, Trump kind of did away with a lot of that, because if it's an unwritten rule, then that doesn't mean that he can't break it or do it, But I think what it does is it highlights where, okay, well, we can't have norms and unwritten rules. It needs to actually be written down that, thou shalt not do X, Y, Z. And if that means we have to say, okay, no conflict of interest, no personal gain from these pardons, then okay. But that's where I would assume that, Dion, as a libertarian, you like less rules, less regulations. So I don't know if you would agree with that. But yeah, I mean,
well, there is something, right? There's something to be said about there being sort of a higher level check on the presidential power, which is that Congress can impeach him for abuses of power. Right. And an abuse of power is essentially saying, well, it was technically in your power to do that thing, but you abused that power. You did something with it that maybe you shouldn't have, or something that was amoral or whatever. Right. So I guess it's kind of like when we were in the military, you could be hit with that conduct unbecoming thing, right? So if they couldn't pin a specific rose to you, they could at least say, yeah, but as an officer, you just shouldn't act that way. And so perhaps we could say that Congress does have the power of impeachment, where they could say, look, that was an abuse of power. You should not use it in this manner.
In theory, but no one from any party would get convicted for doing something that's expressly written in the Constitution that they have the sole power to do, even if they abused it, you know?
And you brought up a point that I think is pretty good, because we're talking about, what is expressly written as like rules and regulation and constitutional powers and that kind of thing. And then what is sort of like norms of behavior that come along with being a politician and a leader in this country. And I remember between 2016 and 2020, there was a lot of talk about how Donald Trump was breaking all the norms and conventions of the role, right? And a lot of people in the media were saying, well, technically, legally, he can do that. It's just that nobody ever has, and we don't think that anyone ever should. And so what I was sort of expecting to happen, and it happened in one or two instances, but by and large, it was kind of left alone, was when the Democrats came back into power in early 2021, I kind of expected a lot more of codifying of these sort of norms and conventions into actual policy and regulation. And I didn't see a whole lot of that happen. The cynic in me says that they didn't do that because they were like, well, if he got away with it, maybe one of us can get away with it in the future.
That may be. I mean, what you bring up, a lot of people have, like, there are a lot of things that Democrats complained about in the first couple of years that when they took back control, like, why didn't they fix X, Y, and Z? And potentially, because they want to benefit from the same loophole. Or just political malpractice. I don't know.
I mean, one to throw out there just as an example would be the filibuster, right? To where it was like, hey, it needs to be gotten rid of. And then all of a sudden, as soon as Trump wins the election, like, nope, we can't get rid of it. Like, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, right? Like, come on, you got to do both. And so it tends to seem that way. Something else I wanted to bring up too, I know we kind of got stuck on like the Hunter Biden pardon, but what about all the commutations that went along too? Was it 1,500 that came along with this as well? I mean, that's a big number, largest in history, right? So, I mean, obviously the power is not just around, pardoning an individual. You can commute sentences for people as well. And that has implications too.
From my understanding,
go ahead, Dion.
From my understanding, the sentences that he commuted were almost exclusively people who had been serving like in-home confinements. And this was because they wanted to uncrowd the jails during COVID. And so they moved, non-violent offenders out from the prisons back to their homes, and they were forced into at-home confinement for that time. And he just was kind of like, look, you're a nonviolent offender and you're just stuck at home. So why should you be stuck at home? As a libertarian, I kind of feel like if there isn't a victim, it's a very hard case to make for me that there should be jail time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to that. I mean, my gosh, the fact that the United States is the most penalized country in the world, the fact that we incarcerate so many people at such a high cost. Yeah, I mean, we want to go back to our discussion on government reform and, unnecessary.
So, Brett, you want to decriminalize marijuana? Is that what I heard?
I
don't know. That's what I heard.
Not specifically from that. I mean, because, that kind of goes to my discussion that we've had before, too, is you can't legalize morality, right? If somebody wants to do something, they're going to find a way to do it. The only thing you have is a stick you can hold over and say, like, well, I can beat you for it. But again, if somebody wants to do something, they're going to do it. It's the same thing I said before. Like, why do you have locks on your doors? Right? It's to keep honest people honest, because if somebody really wants in, they're going to get in. And so, I don't think that's really an argument for that. But again, whole different topic of getting into is like, what kind of culture are we starting in our homes, right? That leads to this excessive need to institutional or incarcerate people. So,
and I don't want to go off on this tangent either, but I do want to bring up, I just saw yesterday, I think it was, an article about the number of people that are ineligible to volunteer for the military because their state has legalized marijuana. And so they admit to smoking and now they can't join the military. I thought that was an interesting side effect or second order consequence of kind of what we're going through with marijuana. But
yeah, I mean, that goes back to, we're talking about the pardon power.
What's that?
I was going back to the pardon power. That was something that Biden did in 2022, right? All the federal marijuana possession offenses just said, okay, since we're legalizing it in certain areas, we'll just do away with those.
Now, as a libertarian, one of the things that would bother me less about the Hunter Biden pardon is if Joe Biden also said, and oh, by the way, everybody whose sole conviction was basically just doing their FFL paperwork, their background check paperwork wrong, those are all pardoned. Because again, if that is the only thing you did, right, like was just, hey, I lied or I did right. To me, that should not be a felony and it should not be jail time to mark the wrong box on a form or something like that. Now, you can't get into a person's mind and absolutely prove that they did it with malicious intent. You know, I've done quite a few of these forms and it is like 3 pages long. And sometimes the type is very small, and like I sit there and I go over it.
He could
like,
come after you. Trump could come after you.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't think I've ever filled one out wrong, but.
Well, I mean, that's one of those things
what I'm
too.
saying?
Like
filling out a form wrong should not be a felony, and you should not be incarcerated for that if that was your sole crime.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, that's one of those, you go to look at it, like we are all criminally implicit with our actions almost every day. Right. With the amount of laws that are on the books, some of them are ridiculous. I think we talked about this last time. You know, some of the stupid stuff that's out there, like, you know, being from Arizona, one of my favorites was that a donkey can't sleep in a bathtub. Right.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that's a law. But
I think here in DC, you're not allowed to hitch your horse outside of a saloon.
Yeah.
I think that's still on the books.
So, but it's like there's all these things that are there. But then you also look at again, how we live our daily lives. We just go about certain things, traffic laws, things like that. I mean, there are crimes that most of us commit probably on a weekly basis that we just aren't aware of, right? Or that they're not a big enough deal. But, you know, if we're talking about a justice system that's going to track this stuff down, well, that becomes a bit of a problem for everybody.
So to Dion, to your, I think, well, maybe it was Brett. I don't know. Good for the goose, good for the gander. Didn't Trump buy a weapon from a gun show, like televised, after he had been convicted of his felony? And everyone was like, well, if you're going to go after Hunter for that, I mean, Trump did it on television.
Did he?
I don't know about that one.
I don't remember seeing that, but I mean, if you say it happened, I have no reason to believe that it didn't.
But it wasn't a malicious, like, oh, I'm going to go buy this gun, even though I know I'm a felon. It was being a felon didn't enter his mind at that particular time. And, you know, he was as not as president, but as, you know, a former president. He was just going to a gun show and it was being televised. Oh, I'm going to buy that gun. That's a sweet looking gun. I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I mean, they didn't show him, you know, filling out the form and everything else. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's probably a loophole because it was a gun show, though.
We at some point we do need to talk about like the Second Amendment and everything. We're gonna have to get into that, but yeah. So like a lot of libertarians, myself included, think that the bar should be very high for restricting somebody's constitutional rights. You know, pick an amendment, doesn't matter, right? The bar should be extremely high. I think just because you were convicted of a felony should not bar you from being able to purchase and own a firearm. It like the bar should have to be like you were convicted of a violent crime, right? Like there was a victim involved that you hurt or killed. Because again, if your crime was you paid a little bit of hush money to a porn star. What does that have to do with a gun, right? Like it is totally not related, and that you shouldn't have your rights restricted for that. So anyways, a little bit off topic, but
and I mean, even though I'm a Democrat, I would probably support that. It's not unless there was a violent component to your crime, unless it's somehow tangential to the firearm issue. And I would trust the judges that are doing these sentences to take that into account in a subjective manner. It probably comes from the mandatory sentencing type stuff, which I have my own issues with. But yeah, I mean, I'd be on board with that.
Yeah. All right. Have we exhausted the pardon topic, or do we still have more to say about that? I know Brett, Will, you put a lot of examples of what you thought were Trump's abuses of the pardon power in the notes. I don't know if you want to go through those.
No, I guess let's just touch on, only because we're all three military people, the military pardons that I remember, having to teach this at the Air Force Academy about, people who had been convicted through courts martial, and the president pardoning them over the recommendations of the DOD. That's what led to ultimately the Secretary of the Navy getting fired. So again, though, it's a constitutional power that the president can do it. But at what point, most of these pardons generally historically came from the Department of Justice recommendations to the president. Whereas more recently, it's the president just deciding, or someone's got a bug in the president's ear and telling them, "Hey, man, you should pardon this person." And when the DOD is saying don't do it, or the Department of Justice is saying don't do it, and they do it anyway, like there's no recourse.
Do you know what his reasoning was for those particular pardons?
I don't know the official, the reasoning that was given. What's in my head is that he just thought that the action itself should not have been considered a crime, but it was like, I'd have to look it up. Whatever it was, I was like, I mean, that's obviously a crime. And again, I'm biased against Trump, and I'm very open about that. It's things that Trump wouldn't consider a crime because Trump likes it or would do it himself. Not something that's frivolous that really shouldn't be a crime, which is why I believe the DOD and the Navy was like, please don't do this. I mean, like one of them was the Navy SEAL who was shooting people, right? Like human rights abuses in war in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yeah, I do vaguely remember that one.
And that's the one the Navy SEAL then went and campaigned for Trump, which I have to believe had something to do with it anyway. When some of the pardons came after people, said nice things about Trump on TV, and then suddenly they get a pardon,
Well, what do we think about, there's some talk that maybe he might pardon like Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden. What do you think about those?
It would be interesting. It would be, I mean, partly the reason why I say that is just, as far as I know, isn't Snowden still in Russia?
I thought he was in Sweden, or
is he?
Is he in Russia? I don't know. I can't remember where he is. I know he bounced around for a while.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, and those are two very different cases, though, too. I mean,
right.
Kind of. Yeah, I don't know.
I personally, so I think we probably all three agree that by the books, both of those individuals committed crimes. I did watch, I forget who he did the interview with. It might have been John Stossel, that Edward Snowden did a pretty long form interview I think it was like 90 minutes or something. And he did say that he had tried going through like the fraud, waste, and abuse channels, the chain of command channels and stuff, and everybody was kind of saying, knock it off, shut up, and just keep doing your job. And that's why he went public with what he found that they were doing.
And that he knew
does
it was
that
a crime.
What's that?
And that he knew it was a crime when he did it.
And he knew it was a crime when he did it, and he decided to do it anyways. And so, on the one hand, we live in a land of law and order, and rules matter and everything. And if the rule of law doesn't matter, then society collapses. So I get that. On the other hand, technically, in 1776, our founding fathers were breaking all of the laws as well. And so I'm kind of torn with. And when you look at what was discovered about what some of our 3-letter agencies were doing, that really bothers me. The types of collections that they were getting away with. So
that's where have civil disobedience comes into play, right? You have the right to be able to do that, knowing that yes, there is a penalty, but it's one of those that if you have to choose, right, is doing the legal thing or doing the right thing matter more?
Yeah, and that's even MLK in the civil rights era, we're going to break these laws and we're going to have to pay the consequences of it. We may do jail time. The founding fathers knew damn well that if they lost that war, they were going to pay the consequences. They would have all been hung for treason. But it was important enough that they decided to break the law and suffer the consequences as needed. I think in your two examples, there's nothing that Trump gained personally. I'm trying to think. Right?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it was
unless he just wants to stick it to certain 3-letter agencies that he thinks has it out for him. That that might be a small gain.
Yeah. So in general, I mean, it would be more akin to a traditional pardon where it doesn't benefit the president doing the pardon directly. So then it just becomes more of an academic, like, okay, so should this happen or not, versus a moral, are they gaining from their position in the office?
Well, and I would think too, going back to what we talked about before, is there a benefit to the nation to do that? Right. And that's, I think, really how the pardon should be looked at is, like we talked about, it's not a personal gain, but also what benefit does it actually bring? Is there some sort of healing for the nation that comes with it? Is there some sort of unification that would come from it? I think those are things that should be considered as well.
And that was what Ford said when he pardoned Nixon, is healing as a nation and moving forward together. I mean, that was
just mercy and healing for the individual?
I'm not opposed to that. I'm just saying those other things should be considered as well. Not that they have to be present for it to be okay, just that it should be considered.
Dion, I don't know about that one, because I mean, why that person and not this person? It's all good things. Yeah. Mercy and healing for the individual. Sure. We would love that for everybody. Those particular, especially those two examples you gave, it's just because they're notorious. They've got notoriety. They're well known. There are other people that are incarcerated for perhaps similar-ish things that nobody knows about. Why? And I don't know. In my mind, like equality, obviously coming from the left. I mean, it's the same thing with like the absolving college debt. Well, why did those people get that debt absolved and I don't get this debt absolved? Why does this person get a pardon, but I don't get a pardon when we did the same crime? Just because one's more well-known than another.
So Will, you would have less issue with it if there was some way to try to ensure that it was equally applied?
I liked your suggestion about how anyone who is convicted of a felony because they filled out the form the wrong way is hereby pardoned. I would prefer that over not just in the Hunter Biden example, but in general. If you're going to pardon someone, pardon the crime itself and let other folks
kind of like what Biden did with the nonviolent drug offenders.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
That's the only crime, you can't be like, well,
right.
I filled out the form wrong and then I went and murdered people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you could be pardoned of the specific crime of filling out the form wrong, but you're still guilty.
Take that 1 year off your sentence.
So long as you're not given a 10-year and 11-month blanket cover. Right?
I don't know how many forms I filled out during that 11-year term. I don't know.
All right. Let's see. Brett, you want to get us started on what's been making you happy this week?
Oh, let's see. Just the general season, honestly. Like, I love the Christmas season. Now, I will admit there is some chaos and craziness that goes along with it. We took a run out to Target earlier because my son needed to pick up a mug for a Christmas mug exchange he's doing at school this week. And so there's chaos, right? But what's nice to admit, kind of in the middle of it, though, is that people are generally more friendly. They're more optimistic. It's just, I don't know, it's a fun time of year for me. So I enjoy just interacting with people and, for the most part, catching them at their best.
Will?
So, yeah, mine is, I guess, related to the season as well. Last couple of days, my daughter's been having a tough time in middle school, and she's really looking forward to Christmas break. I mean, she looks forward to all the breaks. But my family's coming out to Tampa the first time since we moved here. Daughter's going to get some time off of school. So just the opportunity for things to kind of slow down, be with family, all of that is making me happy.
Nice. Yeah. So for me, it's kind of similar, but more specifically, we're recording this a couple of days later than we normally do, and that's because on our normal day of recording, I had my company end of year party. Every year they put us up in a 5-star hotel resort out in the western part of the state, and it's not just like a lot of companies, they'll go to like a fancy venue and they'll have like a big party. And then they're like, but if you want to stay the night, like that's on you. Right. No, like our company takes care of it all. So from lunch, the first day, all the way through breakfast, the following morning, like it's all covered. They arrange activities for us that are all paid for, including tips and everything. So like, and spouses are invited. So my wife and I got to go do falconry, which was really cool. Like we had 2 hours of meeting the falcons and hawks and getting to see like what they were capable of. Unfortunately, it started to snow really bad during the whole falconry experience thing. So we only got a very brief demonstration. He had one like tundra falcon with him that was used to the snow and didn't mind it. So he did a couple of flight demonstrations with it, but overall, that was awesome. And then, of course, just amazing food and dancing. And it was a James Bond theme. So I dressed up as Oddjob, as you could probably, I'll have to share pictures with you guys, but I had the hat and everything. They had like casino tables out for us after dinner, and they gave us, fake money, and there were prizes for people who ended up with the most money at the end of the night and stuff. So it just tons of fun and a great, escape. Just me and the wife being able to make a date night out of it, get dressed up all nice and fancy, and have some good food, have some drinks, dancing and fun. So, yeah,
that's awesome. That's way better than my corporate Christmas experiences. I worked for 2 separate companies, and we had our Christmas party at the exact same location, and they gave the exact same gift.
Will, I think you haven't really
holiday parties.
Like, we've all had like our unit holiday parties, and those are, those are what they are. But Will, I don't think you've had a chance. Like, you're not with a company or anything yet, so you haven't had that like civilian life experience yet of like, oh, this is what you can do when you're not constrained by like federal
This is my real
regulation.
people party. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't work for anyone right now, so my work party is going to be here at home with family.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that either. All right. Well, that brings us to an end.
I want that too.
That brings us to an end this week, and I think we probably had a lot more agreement than the previous week, and so maybe next time we'll pick a topic for you viewers and listeners that we go at each other a little bit more. But appreciate you listening. Please like, subscribe, share us with your family and friends. Especially if you're enjoying this, that will help us and help us to continue to make more content for you. And until next time, out here.
Have a good one.